I often get invited to Republican political events. Inevitably, I'll be talking to some politician and the subject of abortion will come up. And they'll ask me, hey, do you think abortion's murder? I'll tell them, of course it's murder. I just don't think we should stop Democrats from having abortions because their kids will grow up to be socialists anyway. I don't know why they keep inviting me to these things. Hello everyone, I'm Bobtheorc, and today we are going to talk about abortion. Now, I usually stay away from this subject. It's not actually very relevant in my life. Obviously, I'm a man, so I'm probably never going to have to get an abortion. That being said, I also, as a general rule, don't have sex with a woman unless I'm prepared to risk having a kid with her. This keeps me out of a lot of trouble. There's the old saying among guys that you don't want to have sex with women who will end up causing you more trouble than it's worth in the long run. I think that's a polite way of putting it. And that being said, women typically shouldn't be having sex with guys who they can't count on to stick around in the long run should they get pregnant. That avoids most problems. That being said, sometimes stuff happens. So what are we going to do about it? Well, I think that in order to really understand the debate, we should put things into perspective and make sure that we correctly identify each side's arguments. Because a lot of times, the left and right are talking past each other. Now, on the left, or well, it's not even really a left and right thing, but we'll say that the people the pro-choice crowd, some would call them the pro-abortion crowd, but we'll call them the pro-choice crowd. Their general stance is that, it's their body, it's their decision. Nobody should be telling them what to do with their body. And typically speaking, conservatives will agree. The conservative argument is that they see the fetus as a distinct life form with its own separate set of rights. And I don't ever see the two sides agreeing on that. So from a practical standpoint, we live in a society where we are so wealthy and so successful that we have the option to raise unwanted children or to take care of children with serious disabilities. In ancient times, this wasn't always an option. There are stories of, from ancient Greek of the Spartans throwing disabled children off a cliff, disabled babies. And quite often in ancient times or even in medieval times, if you were not a healthy child or if the mother and father could not support you, then you just died. So we have a tremendous wealth in our civilization that was not available before. Does that change the argument? Well, it does a little bit. The other point of contention is that they often talk about the life of the mother, and you could think about it as a priority. Now, most conservatives I know are not opposed to ending a pregnancy if that's what's required to save the life of a mother. And I'm talking about even the hardcore conservatives. Now, in their case, they don't view that as an abortion. They view that as a medical procedure to save the life of the mother, and there's a chance that the baby would die. Their position is typically that they would prefer to see the baby delivered and put up for adoption. Because even, at any point in the third trimester, typically speaking, we have the technology to save the child. In most cases. I think we're looking at this wrong. Now, this is particularly relevant right now because there was a leak from the Supreme Court, which has been confirmed to be, an accurate draft of an opinion that implies that the Supreme Court will overturn Roe versus Wade. So let's start by putting this in a little perspective. Roe versus Wade is, to my understanding, primarily a ruling on privacy, and without it, it would kick all this back to the states. Um, some states like Oklahoma, where I live, will be very restrictive on abortions, and other states like New York, where I also live, will be very unrestrictive on abortions. Personally, I don't think that the government should be involved in any of this stuff. I get very nervous whenever the government wants to regulate medical procedures, to mandate medical procedures or outlaw medical procedures. And I feel that in many ways, the pro-choice argument about abortion is very similar to the pro-choice argument about vaccine mandates. Now, the difference is that in the case of abortion, you have essentially two lives. Um, I know that in Greece, for example, where I have some family, which is far more conservative than America is, it's typically a decision left up to the family and the doctor and the priest, and the government typically stays out of that. And I think that's probably a wise decision. I think that here in America, banning abortions outright is about as bad of a move for Republicans as banning guns is for Democrats. Most people have opinions that lay somewhere in the middle in both topics. Most Americans seem to favor allowing a woman to have an abortion early and tend to be opposed to late-term abortions. I myself am often accused of being a conservative, which in some ways I am, I suppose. And I think that if you're going to do it, you need to do it early. You need to make the decision early. There's a lot of nuance and, about family planning and, what if the child is going to be disabled and other problems. I think that a reasonable-minded person can make reasonable decisions, with their family. I think where the problem occurs is that many people will either use abortion as contraceptive because they just simply can't afford the family. They can't afford to have kids, and that's more of an economic problem. Or they'll have an unreliable boyfriend or husband who bails on them when they're pregnant. And that's another problem. Guys need to man up, but women need to make better decisions on the guys that they're with also. And abortions have risks. I've got a good friend of mine who had an abortion when she was young. I won't go into the details, but it left her permanently damaged. And she may not be able to have children again. So there is a risk involved, even if it's done at a proper professional clinic. Now, realistically, I don't think we should be all up in arms about this. One of my friends who is certainly he would identify as being on the left. He's certainly further left than I am. He's concerned that the lack of privacy will cause all kinds of cascading effects, that getting rid of Roe versus Wade will, start causing a lot of problems with gay issues and interracial marriages and stuff like that. I don't think that's going to be a problem. Most conservatives I know just don't care about any of the LGBT, QIA, whatever the letters are stuff. They don't care about the alphabet soup. Their position is, you do you, man, and, just don't be indoctrinating kids. That's typically their position. And regarding interracial marriages, many of the conservatives I know are in interracial relationships. Um, I think that the conservatives, the modern conservatives, are very different from the conservatives of the 80s and 90s, who, even some of the conservative Pentecostals I know are very chill when it comes to abortions. Their opinion is just, if you're going to do it early, while it's still a clump of cells and before the baby becomes viable. So now I think there's a lot of political posturing going on. And I think, on both the left and the right, and I think that's a mistake. I think that you're going to see people pandering to the extremes for political gain, because they probably think that the extreme elements of the Democrats and Republicans are larger than they really are. And I think that is a strategic blunder. The reality is that most people want to be the decision makers regarding their families, and most people don't care what other families do, as long as they're being responsible about it. Some of this like late term abortion, post birth abortion stuff, that's sort of out there. Most Americans are not in line with that. But most Americans aren't in line with banning, early first trimester abortions either. Typically most people seem to feel comfortable that the 15 to 20 weeks, somewhere in there, is the appropriate time to get it done. You don't always know that you're pregnant before. Sometimes it takes a couple months to know. So you've got to be. I think there's some middle ground, and I think what's going to happen is, I think that if Roe versus Wade gets overturned, which it's a sloppy decision anyway, I think that creates an opportunity for Congress to pass a law to do some sort of privacy protection, which we need anyway. I wouldn't necessarily be opposed to a European-style privacy protection law. And I think that you could, on a state level, certainly you're going to see most states protect at least early abortions. Some states like Oklahoma and Texas are going to be a lot more conservative about it. But I think there's eventually going to be some blowback from that, and I think that they'll eventually moderate their stances. Or people will just simply, drive across state lines. And, on one hand, people would argue, oh, well, people can't afford to travel. I mean, you can drive to Texas and back for like a tank of gas. You can drive to Kansas and back for a tank of gas, maybe two, right? You're going to be out $100 or less. It sucks. It's a lot of money for some people. But I don't think this is going to be the giant catastrophe that the left is warning about. But I also think that the right is going to expend a lot of political capital in achieving something of minor benefit to conservatives. I think that the Republicans would be smart to come out with some sort of moderate bill, but it's an election year and they don't want to upset their base. On the other hand, they take the wind out of the sails of the Democrats, who are going to drive this issue home. And so ultimately, it's not even about abortion, it's about politics, and people are just trying to do the whole my team, your team thing, and that's unfortunate. That's how we get into a lot of problems here in America. Like I said, I personally avoid the decision because, I don't sleep around. I'm pretty conservative in that regard. And I think that people need to, I think if you're going to restrict abortion, you need to promote birth control. Condoms are cheap. So, and I think that parents need to take more responsibility for their children as well. So, like I said, I think that this is going to be, what do they say, a tornado in a tea kettle, something like that. This is going to be a big issue for a short amount of time. I think that Democrats in general are looking for any issue to rally their base, because Biden is not polling very well and the economy is doing badly, inflation is up, and even the Democrats are worried about getting a good shellacking in the midterms. So I think that a lot of this is politically motivated. That being said, I think there is an opportunity for either side or a bipartisan cooperation to work out something reasonable that the majority of Americans can get behind. Because realistically, this should be solved through law and not through a Supreme Court ruling. Or leave it up to the states. I mean, really, the government shouldn't be involved in any of this stuff anyway. So that's my take on it. It's probably not the most popular opinion because it's going to sound all wishy-washy. But ultimately speaking, I'm kind of in the I'll do me thing and you do you thing. And I'm just not too worried about it. Make good decisions. And I'll see you guys next time. Goodbye.